This is for the new, I'm going to make a motion to accept the 2007 motor fuel tax sidewalk improvements resolution. Is there a second?
Second.
On the question? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is the Parkway Tree Preservation Planting Ordinance, and this is a piece of work and worked on by staff, worked on by our tree committee, and definitely with a lot of involvement also from Alderman Cadala. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand this over to Alderman Cadala, and I'll hand the floor over to him to take us through it. And I know we're going to have a lot of input on this, so I believe he's going to want to go line by line. And with that, I'm going to hand the floor over to Alderman Cadala.
All right, thank you, Alderman Winger. Let me start by saying that this is definitely a work in progress. What we're looking for tonight is direction from this body as to whether or not to even proceed. If collectively we think that this is a proper direction to go. Let me start with, like Alderman Winger said, I'm just going to go through this line item by line item. I've already spoken with Gary Holm of City Services, and I will interject his comments as he stated them to me, and then we'll look at him quizzically and make sure I repeated them correctly, and look for any clarification or further questions that he may have. And also, as I'm going through, I'll kind of watch around, and anybody that's had an opportunity to read through this and wants to add anything, correct anything, scream about anything, throw your hand out. I'll call you. Number one, purpose of the ordinance: to preserve, maintain, and plant parkway trees in the city of Wooddale. Section 2, preservation. Part A, no parkway tree should be removed unless dead, life-threateningly diseased, diseased with potential to spread to surrounding trees, or dangerous due to potentially unstable branch structure. To which Mr. Holm responded that there should be at least 4 other items. One is sanitary sewer disturbance. The next one, undesirable species. The third, line of sight disturbance. The fourth, road/sidewalk/utility replacement. To which I'd like to take this opportunity to respond. I see a little way around the sanitary sewer disturbance. The undesirable species, if we use that, I would definitely want to have that list as part of this ordinance. Third, line of sight disturbance. I have a bit of a problem with this. I know trees have been taken down for that reason before. The fact of the matter is that this is a parkway, this is a tree. It's not possible to see through it, so maybe we shouldn't have trees in parkways, but if we do, to remove them because you can't see around them seems odd to me. We are looking at the possibility of B4 zoning, which would ultimately quite possibly create situations in part of this town where we're going to have 0 lot line setbacks and possibly even alleys, which is going to create line of sight disturbances much greater than that of a tree. So I have a problem using that one. Alderman Winger.
Thank you. If the line of sight point is purely right now for Irving Park Road, when the tree is real immature, it's not a large tree. Bushy, right, low and bushy, and it's really meant for when you're pulling out of one of the drives and you can't get onto the main road to see, then ideally we try trimming it. But if there's no hope of after trimming it and it's a hazard, then I'm leaning on accepting that. But I certainly don't want it to be, used openly, or a resident to say, from my house, I can't see across the street, so will you remove it? Like, I just want to clarify too that that's not the intent of line of sight.
Oh, exactly.
Mr.
That would
Holm.
not be the intent. The intent would only be if there's a potential hazard, like you described, where you can see pulling out of a commercial driveway, or if at an intersection they posed a line of sight issue so that you couldn't see cross traffic.
And then would the first course of action be to trim it first to see if that helps? And then if the trimming doesn't help, we remove it?
I guess generically, yes. It would depend on the species of the tree, but yes, generically, yes.
Okay, thank you.
often this line of sight disturbance is caused by the trunk itself, and once a tree reaches 50 or 60 years old, the trunk is of such diameter that it's going to be impossible to see around. So then what happens when we have a resident or even a business that says that when I am pulling out of my drive in this exact spot, I can't see around the tree, but you can see both before and after the tree. That's why I'm not fond of having that in the ordinance, but I see both sides, so we'll just leave it go there. Alderman Wesley.
But I agree it should be left in there, because the simple reason is I could go right now to the tire place, Lucas Tire, and we planted a new tree out there. And I'll tell you one thing, if you pull up there to try to get out, that tree, I cannot see a Wooddale Road coming this way. So that's a brand new tree we planted. I don't know if we planted too close to the street that's blocking the view. So I agree it should be left in there, that, like Christine said, that if it's a safety hazard, yeah, it's got to come out. I'm sorry. And then revisit it. But and the other hand, with yours, with the residential, yeah, if the lady can't see, I think that should be a safety concern that should be addressed by maybe we let the police department pull in their driveway and see if it's a safety hazard. Instead, if that's the way you don't want the public works make that judgment, if the squad car could pull in there and see if it's a safety hazard, or have them look at the safety concern that is brought up and let them make the judgment if it's a safety concern on which direction. That was be my suggestion.
Okay, thank you, Alderman Wesley. Any other comments from staff at this point on that issue? No. Okay. The other one, the last one that Gary brought up, the road and sidewalk utility replacement. There too, I have a problem with that one. I mean, there's the possibility of streets that right now don't have sidewalks when they're reconstructed to have sidewalks put in, and depending on where the parkway trees are laid out and where the lot lines are and where the curb is, you stand to lose a lot of trees for the sake of a sidewalk. And while sidewalks are important, I'd like to have it in writing that trees will not be removed for sidewalks, that the sidewalk will be designed around the tree anytime at all possible. So, Gary, is that something that would make sense to you, that you could live with?
Yeah, with the cedar sidewalk, you'll see the cedar sidewalk is anything but straight. And then the reason why it's anything but straight is because we're meandering around the trees. There's only, on the whole length of Cedar, which is from Irving Park up to Elmhurst on both sides, there's only one, what I'll call an overgrown bush that we're having to take out simply because we have no other choice. But the rest of it, all the trees that you would drive up and down Cedar, we're not taking out any of them.
Great, thank you. Alderman Winger?
I was going to expand on just what Mr. Holm mentioned. Like, I would imagine that in some cases, like, I agree that we need to meander the sidewalks around the trees, but if there's a less mature tree of like a 2-inch in diameter trunk and it's in a spot that we just can't avoid, then I would see us being able to remove it. So I don't know if we need to put some kind of verbiage in there, like less than 3-inch trunk or overgrown shrubs are okay to remove, but the larger, somehow we could craft that in there maybe.
Gary?
And as you know, construction is so variable. You sometimes you just don't know until you encounter the situation. The past policy has been to add curb and gutter. Sometimes the construction of the curb and gutter through the root system might cause a tree to have to come out. Water mains, sanitary sewers. I mean, there's a whole host of reasons why you may have to sometimes take out a tree, even though you work hard and make every effort not to take out trees. I mean, I think that should be a general statement for all designers, is they generally don't want to take out trees. Sometimes they have to.
Yeah, I think that's a great place for even more verbiage. I mean, I think we should be as specific as we can think to be. Alderman Shockey?
As you get farther on, you mentioned about shade trees. You're talking about deciduous trees, and I think they call them in other words, not the evergreen type of tree that will be low to the ground and blocking things.
Correct, that should never be a parkway tree.
Thank you.
Alderman Wesley?
We have always, in the past, They did my sidewalk, my block several years ago, and we did not lose one tree on the parkway. They have done try and go around the trees. So I don't think that's going to be an issue here with sidewalks. Like he said, you might win in one case, but very rarely they try to go around, because I got a couple that goes around each other. I mean, it's got to turn here, turn there. So, I mean, I think that, you know,
Good information, thank you. Alderman Winger? Oh, no? Okay, I saw you touching the button. So, the next part, C, a parkway tree cannot be removed by request of homeowner unless the tree is proven to fall into one of the categories listed above that we just discussed at length. D, parkway trees must be, Alderman Wesley.
all right, let's, the homeowner's request, here's the situation that you may run into if they have a plumbing problem in the house and those roots have got underneath that sidewalk and then interfere with their plumbing situation. I think it's the city's responsibility to remove that tree. For the homeowners, that it's costing them a lot of money to have a plumber come out. I believe in some cases that has happened, in cases that we had to remove a parkway tree because it did damage their own plumbing because of the roots got too big or they buckle up the sidewalk. Now, you're asking if they buckle up a sidewalk too, then does that mean we aren't removing it? We're going to let the sidewalk, we put a new sidewalk in and let it buckle back up? And that's the one I have a problem with. If a house homeowner could prove by, normally they usually camera shoot it. Okay, the resident pays for a camera shoot from their house to the street and find out where the blockage is. If it's got to do with the roots interfering with their residential plumbing, then I think the city should be able to take that down, but they have to prove it in a camera shot or some estimates for some plumbers. I'm sorry, that's the way I feel with that, because it has come to us several times that people want us to pay for their plumbing job repairs because the parkway tree is ours, but it damaged theirs. And so
Well,
I have to agree if they could prove that they should be removed then.
I agree that it's a real problem, and I agree that responsibility of taking care of that is difficult to figure out, who should take care of it, and the city doesn't have enough money to fix this for everybody. But the fact of the matter is, we're a tree city, USA. The cost to take down a large tree could exceed $2,000. Let's take the example of a sidewalk. It's one part of the root system busting up the sidewalk. For $2,000, I bet you we could have a tree expert dig that part of the ground out, remove that section of root, do some crown thinning, replace the sidewalk, probably for about the same amount of money, and not have to lose the whole tree. Same thing with the sewer interference. The whole tree isn't in the sewer. One part of the root system is. So there again, if it's a big tree, and maybe this will turn into a 20-page document being specific like this, but you can remove that part of the root system out, thin the crown so that you don't compromise the health of the tree. Maybe even you probably don't even have to replace that section of sewer once you stop the roots from growing, and possibly end up ahead a couple of dollars, or at least not have to remove a big tree. Alderman Wesley.
But again, at whose expense though? If we are damaging their their plumbing situation, yeah, that will be our expense. But wouldn't it be easier to just tear that tree down and put a new tree up then, if that's the case? I mean, then
if life was about being easy, none of us would be sitting up here. I mean,
that's fine, but
we'd be watching TV right now. I mean, I see your point, but the city has an expense one way or another. So for the integrity of the city, the aesthetics of the city, and the deep intent of what this ordinance is trying to do, maybe there is alternatives to the typical conventional methods that we all know. Yeah, Mr. Williams.
And in this particular case, you both are correct. From the Alderman Wesley's standpoint, we have planted the trees in the wrong places, and it has caused a whole bunch of problems. And so what we have been doing is deciding on a case-by-case basis when we come to these issues, depending upon the cost and everything involved. That's why he shows a concern. And on the other hand, Alderman Kadala is correct. For the future, we should plan where we put the trees and everything so we don't have this. So it's a tough one here, and we'll try to work with this. But you both bring up very good points, and this is one of the reasons why we need to have a policy, because otherwise each tree, and we've done this. We've had we had the mayor decide what the tree should be taken down or put up and or left alone or whatever. But the issue is that a homeowner, and we have a lot of longer lots and a lot of giant trees, and in many cases, we don't have any choice but to take the tree down. I've been on a few of those over the years. But in the future, I think, that's a very good point that you make. Just our
Yeah.
comments, that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. I think there's always going to be a case where a tree is going to have to come down, but what I'm asking us to do is look into possible scenarios where it doesn't have to if the cost is at least no greater, and if the threat of the problem coming back has been limited. All right. Parkway trees must be properly protected during construction of either private or public nature, is the next section. This would be done by, 1, a temporary fence shall be required to be erected around all parkway trees within 100 feet of any construction before work begins to establish a tree protection zone. Number 2, temporary fencing shall include the area associated with the critical root zone, the area inscribed by an imaginary line on the ground beneath the tree, having its center point at the center of the trunk of the tree, and having a radius equal to 1 foot for every inch of, I forget what that stands for, diameter, but not less than 6 feet from the trunk of the tree. The city arborist/forester may expand the critical root zone depending on the tree species and site-specific situations, so as to improve the chances that the tree will not be damaged during construction. That's boilerplate. Number 3, if the fence shall be similar to a 48-inch high plastic polytype or any other type of highly visible barrier, it shall be properly maintained and shall remain erect until completion of the construction project. Alderman Coles.
I think they stopped that. Didn't they, Gary? No, you don't use plastic fences around it, you use a anchor fence, don't you? Now, around construction, they stopped, I believe they stopped using that plastic.
Use that black stuff now, go around.
What?
You use a black thing now, go around it.
Or
Like a,
the black is
Oh,
still
just the
so.
tree. But what about the construction area? The construction area is fenced in now, has to be fenced
Yeah,
in.
an actual construction site, like for a home, would be
Yeah,
fenced in.
Fenced in.
This is just tree protection. This is to draw the contractor's attention to say, don't drive your tractor over this tree's roots.
9 times out of 10, it'll die anyway. 2 years from now, when they they put the house in, 2 years from now, they'll die. Don't tell me that, because I had 11 oak trees on my property. I got 1. They all died. 10 of them died in 1 year after the house was built. So don't say the trees won't die, because they will. They're swamp oaks, and swamp oaks die because it changes the water table. When you build a house, it changes the water table. And the water table changes, the swamp oaks die.
Thank you. Section E, a fine would be placed on any individual or entity who removes a parkway tree on their own with their own resources without city's approval. I'm being aggressive here, and I'm probably being too aggressive, but what I'm saying is that the fine would be $100 per diameter of tree caliper as measured at 4 feet above the ground. The fine would always be a minimum of $1,000 and would not exceed $3,000. Mr. Holm has told me about a national standard for the value of trees and shrubs, something which I believe has been contested and successful. So this is perhaps a pricing that we'll want to follow and look into. Section F, injurious actions taken against a parkway tree should result in a fine to the property owner at said parkway tree. Examples would be, number one, purposely girdling the tree with the possible result of mortality so that the tree would fall into one of the categories listed in 2A. Number two, construction of any structure in or in contact with the parkway tree. Number three, pruning of parkway tree without consent of the city. The next section talks about maintenance. A budget amendment. Now, this probably wouldn't be in the actual ordinance, but it's something that to bring to everybody's attention. A budget amendment will be presented to council and staff to find and allocate additional funds in future annual budgets for the purpose of parkway tree maintenance as identified here.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Back of trimming the Parkway tree,
Yes.
there's a situation that was in my ward already, that we have a sidewalk in the area and a tree branch was hanging over on top of the sidewalk. I think the homeowners, if it's in front of their property and it's blocking the sidewalk like that, instead of tying up staff, why can't they trim it? I mean, if we're going to tie up staff, we'll be having a phone calls galore, because you better come down Itasca Street and trim about 9 trees right now.
I'm going to let Gary talk about that, but I know Mr. Williams also wants to say
Okay.
something. Gary?
I think that's a comment on the lack of a program that the city has had. In other words, we haven't had a tree trimming program, a formal tree trimming program. And it talks later in this document, but we are proposing in an agreement that we need to have a formal tree trimming program. So we go on a regular basis through the town, addressing just those types of issues that you're talking about, that would rotate through town. And we so we can stay on top. You're right, currently the trees do have a lot of those issues. That's because they haven't been trimmed. And if we can get into a program where they are trimmed, we can avoid those issues before they happen.
But when do you think, may I follow up with that?
Yes.
When do you think that program will be ready to go? Because here we're looking at adopting ordinance. And if we're going to adopt that ordinance now, is that program going to be ready to launch when we adopt this ordinance? First of all, we already talked about that we don't have enough staff to mow the lawns. We're talking about contracting it out. Are we talking contracting the tree company out too to trim the trees? Or are we going to have the staff to do that? And if, in a nutshell, when are we looking to impose that tree thing then? If we adopt this ordinance, how long am I looking?
Gary, before you say anything, let me jump in that I'm not looking for us to adopt this tonight. This needs a lot of work, and part of adopting this is having the budget to be able to do everything in here, and also knowing that staff will be able to start performing all duties as outlined in this ordinance. So at this point, it's discussion. Do we even take this any further? I don't know if once everything is identified, how much work there's going to be, if we'll even be able to find the budget, the money in next year's budget, or if this is 2 or 3 years away. I don't know, but that is when I would think that we would be officially adopting the ordinance. Mr. Williams.
Yes, I would agree that this type of thing is something that you start with, and we use it as a guideline, and then it becomes, as Alderman Catala said, this is a work in progress. Normally, with policy and procedure, we start out with the basics and we build on it. And what we would have to do is we'd have to have a budget and this type of thing. Certainly, if someone had a tree branch going over their sidewalk and they cut the branch down, we would rather have that regulated so we could do it in conjunction. But in communities that have been at this for longer periods of time, they actually set a limit. They say, okay, every 3 years, we will trim your trees, and then you get a survey saying, okay, are we keeping up, or should we trim them more? And then we come to you with a budget. This is only a starting point, and certainly we won't be able to do everything, but if we have a guide, we can begin the process. That's all we're looking for here.
Alderman Winger.
I would say that item F, number 3, does need to stay in there, and it does provide for coverage if a resident, and some residents don't like their parkway trees, and they may say, well, I'm going to prune it, and then they cut it down to where you lose the tree because it's going to die. So this is a nice safeguard that they really do have to call the city if they want to do it, and then the city would direct them on how to do it. So I'm more comfortable having this in there.
Thank you. Okay, the next, and that is Alderman Wesley, that is addressed, the 4-inch rule, so to speak. B, pruning should be done by professional tree care company or trained in-house staff with a licensed arborist on site during pruning periods. Alderman Winger.
Thank you. I would say that this may be overkill, that if we're doing trimming, I don't want to tie up an arborist all day long as well when the trimmer is going through. So perhaps an arborist drives through, spends about a half hour just going through Wooddale where the trimmer was. But I feel it would get costly and cumbersome to have the arborist on site during the whole pruning period.
Mr. Holm.
Our street supervisor is going through the training this fall to become a certified arborist. We will be following and implementing, and it's one of our recommendations, I should say, more appropriately, one of our recommendations is to follow and implement following the national ANSI standard, the A300 pruning standard, which is a standard that anyone in the tree business understands and knows. So that we require private companies, if they're working on our parkway trees, or our own staff to trim in accordance and prune in accordance with those standards. So that everyone's working off the same set of standards.
Okay, then that sounds good to me, that it would be an in-house arborist overseeing the activities, is what I gathered from what you explained.
And I would phrase it exactly that way, overseeing the activities. I don't know that we could afford to have the in-house arborists stand out there all day long and watch the tree trimming.
Okay.
But that said, we also want to encourage, and we have been encouraging, the guys to become certified tree workers.
Right.
And that's part of like one of the stipends in their contract is if they become a certified tree worker, they get a stipend. And that allows them then to know these standards and to work in accordance with the standards.
Okay, so for purposes of this ordinance, that item B would just need to be tweaked a little bit, perhaps?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Any comments from council right now? All right. C, a map and schedule shall be created which should result in every parkway tree being assessed and pruned if necessary every 5 years. There's a theory of maybe 3 years out there, and there's a theory that maybe they should always be pruned, crowned thin to some degree. So this obviously another item that needs work. Alderman Winger.
And I would just look for a college intern to be the person that would document where the trees are at each house, because I wouldn't want to, pay like a couple tens of thousands of dollars to have a whole assessment done.
Mr. Holm, I know where you're going. Take it.
I'll very meekly say that we're already doing that process. It's less than $10,000. It actually is a survey that will get every single parkway tree into our GIS system, so that when we pull up the GIS system, we'll be able to click on any tree in town. We'll know the species, we'll know the size, we'll know the condition. If there's a sidewalk buckling problem, all of that information will be right at our fingertips in our GIS system within the next couple of months here.
Okay, good. So it's rolled into the other activities we're doing with GIS,
Yep.
and it's just another add-on. And while we're doing the other things, why not throw the tree in there since we're already doing this?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, item D, special assessment and pruning, if necessary, would occur after significant storm damage at the request of the property owner and at the expense of the city. But it sounds like we would also want to be implementing some kind of a city procedure for checking the trees after storms of a significant size as well. Alderman Winger.
I think that item E is a little cumbersome because how are we going to define, okay, what's less than 4 inches, and all of a sudden a resident goes and prunes a lot more than they should. So is this somewhat hard to enforce, limiting, and confusing?
Well, in my opinion, it's going to be darn near impossible to enforce, but at least it's black and white on paper. It becomes part of the ordinance. It becomes a rule, and if maybe hopefully it's a deterrent. Maybe it'll never be read, but it's a guideline if nothing else. Mr. Holm.
And I'll just reiterate staff's recommendation on ENF was to remove ENF altogether. In other words, to allow residents to park.
To take out ENF.
Take out ENF.
Yep.
Don't allow residents to park.
Right. Are you okay with that?
All right. Yeah, I'm okay with it. I mean, E and F came in as a result of a lot of discussion at Streetscape and Tree Committee. I thought they were valid and worth putting in, but everything in here is up for discussion, removal, adding to, so forth. So I won't even read F at this point. It's along the same lines. G, if the tree has a caliper larger than 12 inches and the resident requests additional care in the form of systemic injection due to non-life-threatening disease, and the property owner is willing to pay 2/3 of the cost of said systemic injection, the city would pay the additional 1/3 of the cost. Now, my discussion with Mr. Holm resulted in, first of all, there would need to be an assessment if the tree species and condition makes it a good candidate for systemic injection. But obviously, there's the cost of this, which would be difficult to budget every year. So this may never actually make it to fruition, but just another idea I wanted to throw out there. Item H, look into the possibility of receiving a credit from ComEd such that they would no longer send their pruning contractor to Wooddale. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but where this is going is the idea of taking the pruning away from ComEd. But Gary said that that's probably never going to be able to happen. But what we could do is make sure that they follow the ANSI 300 pruning specifications. Gary, am I reiterating that close to the way you told it to me? Okay, thank you. Alderman Wesley.
But if I ain't mistaken, the ComEd issue here is that they do have a professional tree company that does come in and do all the trees, and they are certified tree trimmers. You know what? They've been doing it for years. That would be a hard one to know, because ComEd could tell us, take down all our parkway trees because the lines are going through there. You know, that's a touchy situation. But back into this, what are you talking about in the ordinance here? Are we talking about the right-of-way behind the houses too?
No, only Parkway. Only the right-of-way behind the house is the tree is owned by
So
the
then I don't know
resident.
how you can enforce that with, even consider it with ComEd when they come in and clean out behind the residents too.
I'm not talking about it. I'm only
Well,
talking
why
about
would you
Parkway
even
trees.
consider it on parkway trees? I mean,
City-owned tree, and in view of the general public and the aesthetics of the
well,
street.
ComEd owns those lines too. ComEd could come and say, remove all parkway trees too. So if you want to open up a can of worms like that, go ahead. But I suggest H should come out.
Oh, I'm okay with that. I've read that in other parts of the country that this has actually successfully been taken away from the electrical carrier, but quite possibly at 100% the cost of the municipality doing that. Mr. Williams, and then Mr. Coles, I believe.
We have very good relationship with ComEd, and if we were to do something like this, as you have pointed out, even with the trees in the backs and private trees, they generally will go along with the city. They want to be good neighbors, and they want to have the support. So it can go either way again. You could put it in there, and if it was a situation where they had to do it, we could make a judgment call. The staff could make a judgment call on this if it wasn't correct in doing that, and we could take it out. But it wouldn't hurt to try and start out with something. But again, you know, many of these things, and with a policy and procedure, if they're not legal or they're not correct or whatever, they would have to be amended. And as we go through this, and even as years pass, we'll probably want to take things out and amend things. But it's a good start again to consider that.
Thank you. Mr. Coles? Alderman Coles, sorry.
There isn't that many lines over the parkways in front of the houses. Most of them are always in the back. So, I mean, that's very, very few. I haven't seen hardly anything in
But this-
front of the houses.
But this ain't considered just a parkway. What about all along Irving Park Road? What about in front of City Hall? I mean, that's our property.
Okay.
I mean, you
Most
just
of-
aren't talking
all the
parkways,
streetlights-
streets,
all
you're
the
talking
streetlights are
everything.
underground.
No, I'm only talking Parkway here. This whole ordinance is only about Parkway trees.
Well, if you
And item H has,
Are you talking about the parkway trees along Irving Park Road? That's a parkway
It's a
tree, far
parkway
I'm
tree,
concerned. So
yes.
that is, so Joe, there is wires under there, those trees.
Under the ground.
No, not on Wooddale Road. I mean, not on Irving. But at the bowling alley, they're above ground.
You're both right. There's not that many places in town, but there are in fact areas where the power lines are at the street on the parkway. And because of all this debate, you'll see I had H italicized. I felt pretty weakly about it myself, to be honest with you, but I thought it was at least worth throwing in there. Section 4 is about planting. A, all newly planted parkway trees shall be shade trees, except in the following circumstances, where a significant size and healthy tree on private property within close proximity to the location of the new parkway tree location would be adversely affected by a tree that will eventually grow large and cause significant shade to the existing private tree, or when the tree must be planted directly under power lines. Item B, all parkways should have a shade tree planted no more than 40 feet from the next parkway tree, except in the same conditions as noted in 4A, which is the one we just talked about. If ornamental trees are necessary due to circumstances as identified in 4A, spacing shall be no more than 25 feet apart. C, all newly planted parkway trees shall be purchased and installed by either city services or a private contractor hired by the city. D, all newly planted parkway trees shall be watered by the property owner unless a hardship can be proven. Alderman Wesley.
Okay. First of all, I suggest you take that out, because simple reason is, you know what you're going to have? You're going to have a people saying, well, it's my water bill, why should I water your parkway tree? You know what I'm saying? That could be touching there.
I see your point, but our parkway tree raises their property value probably beyond ultimately the cost of watering it for that first season.
All right, well, I'll send
It's
the
up for debate. Well, I mean,
I'll send the seniors knocking your door then when they have to water a parkway tree that we planted in their property.
Unless a hardship can be proven. So, all right, E, a list of acceptable parkway trees may include the following species, but should be reviewed by a licensed arborist for disease resistance, climate compatibility, and street side compatibility, meaning no weak wood, no extremely fast growers, no short-lived species, no fruit, etc. Under shade trees, sugar maple, Norway maple, red maple, bur oak, white oak, northern red oak, katsura tree, ginkgo, honey locust, black locust, American elm, but a new approved Dutch elm disease-resistant cultivar such as Accolade, American linden, little leaf linden, silver linden. Under ornamental trees, things such as flowering crab, apple, non-fruiting, of course, dogwood, redbud, and Japanese maple. And that is the end of the ordinance as it is written. Alderman Shockey.
I think we say right now that we won't plant sugar maple trees because they grow so fast and foul up the,
That's silver maple. Those are silver maple.
Is it?
Sugars, I don't know if Gary, you have any more knowledge of it, but silver is the fast-growing weedy tree.
all right.
Sugar is what you'd grow and you can actually tap and make maple syrup out of a much stronger wood.
You must be arborists.
Alderman Winger.
Thank you. Just an item that perhaps we could have the arborist look at this before we do the list,
Yeah.
and then it'll just be in the ordinance and,
Right, yeah, the text would be gone. It would just be the approved trees. Alderman Coles?
okay, perfect.
Nothing, I changed my mind.
Alderman Wesley?
No, I wait till final draft comes.
Okay. All right, I'm going to give the floor back to Alderman Winger.
Thank you, Alderman Cadalet. Then I am going to